Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So it's my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Satoshi Matsuoka, who will be speaking about the large-scale GPU-accelerated Windows HPC clusters, an application to advanced bioinformatics and structural proteomics.
Okay, thank you.
Proteomics.
Great. Sorry for the wait, folks, and it's my pleasure and honor to be able to present here, and hopefully we'll utilize the time available. So, how do I get this to present? Presentation mode. Okay. So, let me first say what we're the problem we're dealing with. So, here is a very typical supercomputer at Tokyo Tech that we have installed in 2006, and it's a fairly big machine. You know, it has 10,000 CPUs, has some accelerators, it's got over a petabyte of storage, and got about 50 gigabytes of bandwidth of storage system. Very typical. This was the fastest supercomputer in Asia for about 3 consecutive times. So it's a big machine, uses about 1.2 megawatts, built by NEC and Sun collaboratively with other vendors. And we want to scale this. 2012, 2010, 2012, 2014, we want to keep on continuing to scale. Anyway, it's just at the 2010 time frame, in comparison with a top-tier machine, we had to build a petaflop machine. In 2012, will be 3 petaflops and so forth. The biggest problem is power. So even TSUBAME, our machine TSUBAME, is doing pretty well now. Compared to Blue Gene, probably about half as efficient, but because of some of the early acceleration attempts we had with ClearSpeed, we're doing very good. However, in order to attain 10 times performance boost in terms of power performance, and maybe 1,000 times over 10 years, we have to do much better than the Moore's Law. So how do we achieve that is a big question. Now, fortunately, the new breed of extreme multi-core CPUs are starting to appear in the form of GPUs. This is a very typical NVIDIA CUDA architecture. You have similar architectures from AMD, with Intel, very different variations. The latest incarnation, they have each of the chips have 240 streaming processors, each one being fairly capable, being able to do floating-point multiply add in one cycle. And this poses great opportunities for a relative power performance boost. And but we don't know what the possibility is for scientific codes. As much as there have been various advertisements by NVIDIA and various success stories, we really don't know what, aren't really quite sure whether big scaling applications on machines like that, on TSUBAME, whether it's applicable to these types of new architectures. It is attractive, nevertheless, because GPUs, if you look at these as extreme multi-core and solution to this problem, even today we have about 1.4 billion transistors on a chip. And combine that with existing node on the right-hand side, this will be the TSUBAME node. You can add this to attain quite a bit of a massive FFTW speedup. In 2016, that's at a 65 nanometer range. In 2016, when we move to scale to about 15 nanometers, we can expect to have, if we do the straightforward extrapolation, about 5,000 cores in each chip, and about 20 teraflops of floating-point multiply add single precision. So this is almost like TSUBAME on a single chip, at least 2 or 3 chips, maybe 4 chips. So that's our synopsis of our collaboration with Microsoft in trying to exploit this extreme multi-core possibility in this HPC-GPU project. Well, we have lots of things going on. We have lots of things in systems area. But today, in interest in this being an eScience conference, we'll focus on the science that's being done using these types of architectures, especially related to proteomics, and also I'll introduce you to some of the climate environmental research we're doing using GPUs. Firstly, the attraction of GPU is not just its raw computing power, but rather you can think of GPU as a rebirth of the old vector machines. Those of us, people like Dennis or Malcolm who are sitting in the audience, remember the old vector days, right, with the Crays and NECSXs. And but a lot of the, most of the modern codes are now redesigned to work well on caches, but some, of course, don't. We really have to go back to the old drawing board using the GPUs to essentially make the, to experience the rebirth of the classic vector-based algorithms. In fact, a lot of the applications where cache-based CPUs are not good for can be done very well on GPUs, but these can be categorized into actually two distinct areas. One is the n-body, which was in previous talk, although the computation wasn't done on GPUs. There are a lot of work where very tightly coupled code accelerate very fast on GPUs because it's a massive floating-point capabilities. But there's another class of problems where the conventional cache-based processors were not good at due to their restrictions in bandwidth. And traditionally, these have been the last strongholds of the classical vector processors like Crays and SXs. Things that involve FFTs or things that involve fairly complicated finite difference type of methods, where cache-based approaches simply do not work very well because of the bandwidth restrictions. So these two distinct type of codes where science needs to be done in simulation, we're focusing on not only this, but really on the vector processor, traditional vector processor type applications where cache-based CPUs simply don't work very well. By achieving that, we can get tremendous speed up. So tremendous speed up comes not just because of the compute units in the GPUs, but because of the bandwidth in the GPUs. And exploiting that, we can accelerate to a much greater degree compared to the apparent roll flops difference between the GPUs and CPUs. So we're at TSUBAME, about 100 terascale machine using 1 megawatt of power, tens of millions of dollars SRP, manufacturers SRP. Of course, we buy a lot cheaper than that, but still very expensive. It can be scaled down for these type of applications. If you do not the scale up, the scale down, you can think of an entire machine being fitting into a closet or a desktop. And again, these are due to the bandwidth, but we need to have advances in algorithms in order to re-exploit these vector algorithms because they're not simply adaptable because of differences in the architectures, differences in the commodity nature of these GPUs that make straightforward adaptations of these old type of algorithms not very feasible. So one application that we collaborate with Microsoft on this particular research is protein-to-protein interaction. And this class of application is very important because it's used for new generation of drug design. And it's enzymatic reaction, signal transduction, formulating protein scaffolds, etc. Now, what we really want to do is to do all-to-all docking comparison. So we want to see, given one protein, which is one of your cellular membranes, and given a proteomic enzyme, we want to see how these proteins dock. And that's very essential because whether the protein docks or not is the first order of approximation as to whether there will be any sort of reactions or whether the drug will discover its target and so forth. But 1,000 by 1,000 is a massive compute endeavor. Even with, and if you go to the first principle type of calculation, it's pretty much hopeless. If you try to do molecular orbital, even molecular dynamics, solving this problem is intractable. You need a zetascale machine to solve this problem. So we do approximation. We do what's called rigid body docking. So as a first order filtering, we consider the protein as being rigid and try to do docking in a more compute-centric way rather than to do physical simulation. But even this, as I will tell you later, this will take 500 years on a single PC, or at least 2 years on the Blue Gene. And those are the people we have collaboration with. And I won't really go into this, the argument of rigid docking versus flexible docking, because this is for the bioinformatics people. There's ongoing debate, but we claim it's still useful. So how do we calculate? Well, we can take a protein like that and take another protein and make a 3D voxel data out of the protein. So these are volumetric data. And we do matching. Now, we do if you do straightforward matching, there's 6 degrees of freedom, so it turns into n to the order 6 problem. We solved that to some degree by doing 3D complex convolution, which reduces the problem to being n cubic log n. And then we find out the candidate docking sites, we do cluster analysis, and we come with docking confidence level. Even with this approximation, each docking involves about 200 teraops given the if you go to the finer resolution. And doing 1001, 1000 takes about 200 exo operation, which is a 2 to the 20th, which is 10 to the 20th operation, number of operations. The other bad news is that the convolution will require that you do FFT. And you know how great FFT works on conventional processors. Well, they don't. So despite tens of gigaflops, even 100 gigaflops that next generation processors will claim for you, FFT on these processors are usually abysmal, even if you use libraries like FFTW. So that's the problem. And just to show that rigid docking actually work, this white dot and red dot are this red dot is a prediction, the white dot is the real docking site, and with appropriate, and the little white dots are candidate sites. But with with appropriate docking and candidate selection by clustering, we come to a fairly accurate rendition of the docking. This is a particular trypsin and inhibitor combination. So we really have to speed up FFT using GPUs. And this was the subject of our paper at SC08 and done by Kiri Nakata, who's sitting back there. And this involves 3D revisiting, like I said, of the old FFT, the multi-row FFT algorithm that was invented for vectors many years ago, but adapted so that there has to be considerable adaptation of the algorithm because of the way the memory system works for GPUs, which are different from the traditional vectors. And really have to optimize using considering various factors involving the memory system, predominantly because 3D FFT involves not just stride axis, but also considerable memory access in the transpose operation in X, Y, and Y, and Z directions. For details, read the paper. So the results are very good. On the 1D FFT, which is a component FFT, if you do 3D, you do FFT on 3 axes. The latest GTX 280, you get about the 300 gigaflops or 256 cubic problem. And when you go 3D, of course, you lose a little bit of performance because of the transpose involved. But our FFT, we get about 140 gigaflops. Compare this with what you get on the standard quad-core processors, which is about 10 gigaflops using all four cores. Or even on a single TSUBAME node, which is 16 operon cores, you get only about 20. On a cell, you get about 450, and these are the different incarnations of NVIDIA CUDA GPUs. This is single precision, and that's what we only need for a particular problem. What about double? Well, on the latest NVIDIA, you get double precision too, although you don't get much because ratio of floating point single versus double is about 1 to 10 on the architecture. Still, you get about 40 gigaflops on each card, and in fact, we are not bandwidth starved, but we're actually compute starved in this particular setting. And this is about the same as performance as a single Earth simulator node per each GPU card. Put that in perspective compared to the parallel FFT performance to get on TSUBAME. Now, TSUBAME being a very good machine, I'd like to think so, the bandwidth of the networks and memory gets all taxed. So in fact, on a single node you get 20, but as soon as you go multi-node, you lose performance immediately because you have to go over these InfiniBand links. And then you recover performance at 32 nodes, and you get maybe double the performance, a little over 3 times the performance at GTX 280. But by that time, you're using 64 nodes or 512 CPUs. So this is a single card versus hundreds of operons on this parallel architecture. Still, the problem is when you start going to PCI Express. So because 3D FFT is fundamentally an n log n problem, you lose performance in data transfer. So the solution is really to, there are many various solutions for tackling the problem. For this particular case, the solution was really to embed the entire application, almost the entire application into a GPU card. So this is the flow chart. And essentially, we put all the operations into the main loop into the GPU card, thereby not incurring very little transfer overhead. So essentially, we put the application into the GPU, and I think that's going to become more dominant as we discover new algorithms and new applications good for the GPUs. So with the help of Microsoft, we built this 128 GPU or 32-node 128 GPU cluster running Windows, HPC 2008. We had a little bit of problem doing that, especially with GPU-enabled clusters. Various minor problems. We worked with the HPC team to solve that. And we're putting in new nodes with 280 and InfiniBand. And so what's the deal? So how much performance boost do we get? Well, comparing BlueGene, TSUBAME, 10,000 CPUs on TSUBAME, x86s, and a particular cluster, the real comparison is here. We get about the same performance as a 4-rack BlueGene now on our cluster. About a little less than half the performance of TSUBAME, entire 10,000 CPU TSUBAME. But the real story is here. Megaflops for watt in terms of real application performance. This is the convolution performance. And here we can see that we are about more than 4 times superior compared to BlueGene now. So this is, so you can argue that you can get better performance on the BlueGene P. However, we can argue that we're using older generation card with a newer generation. Again, we recover the performance there by this ratio is pretty much the same. So, for this particular application, we are about 4 times. We're about 4 times better in terms of power performance at very, very low cost. We're applying the cluster to a different breed of bioinformatics application. This is a particular DNA Giga Sequencing using GPUs. This was mentioned earlier in Darryl Green's talk. We have to, we can do all this Giga Sequencing of drugs for drug targets. However, how do we compute? How do you do the computation? That's a big problem, actually. Not just the Darryl mentioned database approach. We like to think of a compute-based approach. In fact, the team by Akiyama's group has developed a Rigourous Smith-Watherman gap alignment problem on GPUs. And using 128 GPUs, we can do 50 million fragments, which is actually necessary for these giga machines. Doing the fragment reassembly in about 16 hours using the 8000 GTS and about 9 hours using Tesla 10. So if you have something that can read the entire human genome in about a week, we can use a fairly exact, fairly precise Smith-Watherman gap reconstruction, gap comparison reconstruction in about 9 hours using the cluster. What about CFD? Well, sorry, it took so much time to copy over the animation. So we have another scientist, a guy named Aoki, in our institution. He's doing all these cool CFD stuff, and whether environment, civil engineering, safety, nuclear cooling pipe simulations, and so forth. So he got hooked on to using GPUs with us, and he's been porting many of his finite difference, high precision direct methods, method solvers onto GPUs. And he's embedding like 100 times speed up on these very, very hard instability codes. This mixture of two different types of fluids, and that leads to instability. This is very typical in like supernova explosions. True stream instability in plasma physics. Again, he's getting like 130 times speed up for CPUs. And 3D problems, it's even more phenomenal, where this is a nanoscience structure where conventional CPUs couldn't really tackle it. Now he's getting 160 times speed up on this particular Hilliard equation with a very high stencil count. So armed with all these earlier results that he's got, now it was time to do some good for the human nature. So he went on to tackle the real-time tsunami simulation. So if you remember the disaster that happened some time ago, the early warning tsunami's early warning system is usually driven as a database. So you have all these tsunami occurrences stored in a database, and when something happens, you look at the database. The problem is not all tsunamis are the same. So what you really want to do is to compute these in real time. So when a tsunami happens, you compute in real time, predict disaster. But it has been said that takes a huge machine, a huge dedication of huge supercomputers to do so. In fact, I think there's an NSF program to tackle these kinds of problems using their big terabyte machines. But what if we can do this in a very small Windows cluster? So he tackled the problem. This is shallow water equation, and the 3D. I will skip all the physics and all the computational methods he used. So basically, he says it's a two-dimensional problem. We do point value computation. We do some advanced high precision techniques, finite difference high precision techniques. And he says the essential part is the run up to the dry area. So you want to see how much of the dry land is affected by this run up of the water onto the shores. So this is a capture of a real-time simulation. Okay, so although it's rendered, this is running in real time. So I've never seen a real-time tsunami simulation before in my life. So I was really flabbergasted when I saw his results, despite the fact we collaborate tightly. So this is a real mountain, something that we got off a geographic database, and we ran a real tsunami on this particular mountain. And this is how it looks, and it runs in real time. In fact, it will run faster without the rendering. But it was quite amazing. So we get about 60 times speed up compared to CPUs, even on a single GPU. So with appropriate parallelization of this, which we're working on right now, with 32 GPUs, it's sufficient to cover a 3,000 by 3,000 kilometer area on a 500-meter mesh. And the simulation, including all the corollaries for tidal potential wind effect, should take less than 10 minutes for the entire tsunami simulation. 32 GPUs, that's a single rack of the previous Windows cluster. So we believe even developing countries can afford this type of equipment. And by demonstrating this on the cluster we saw earlier, we believe this will serve as a great early warning system, and that's why we're collaborating with this particular Asian Disaster Preparation Center and Japan's Meteorological Agency, partly, in order to say that, well, we need computational simulation will actually exceed the traditional database-based methods. So we got really happy with the result final few minutes, and really happy with the results. Said, well, why if we equip our supercomputer with our GPUs? And we actually did that recently. So October, we teamed up with NVIDIA and installed 170 Tesla 1070 units, or this is equivalent to 680 high-end 4 gigabyte Tesla cars using a G200 core. So now even TSUBAME is equipped with 10,000, not only with 10,000 CPU cores, but 300,000 SIMD cores, the SPs that I showed you earlier, which actually boosted the performance to about 900 teraflops in single precision, 170 teraflops in double. And in fact, the installation was quite tricky because we had to install all the units live while our supercomputer is running. And it was quite a feat, actually, and to proclaim the least. And the way we did was we put the units in very carefully. And then when something was taken off the batch, once job finishes in one of the nodes, we just take it off the batch queue, insert the cards, and put it back in service. This was happened and when operators were watching. So we put 170 units with 680 cards in place, and they're almost invisible. And they consume about 150 kilowatts more, but our power system can afford that. But now we have this amazingly heterogeneous system where the 170 teraflops actually of the double precision actually consists of 318 nodes of configuration like that, which is 2 Tesla cars, 1 clear speed, and 16 operons. 330 nodes don't have any Teslas, but just have the clear speed, and 90 nodes are just no accelerators. In fact, they're Xeon nodes that only have 8 cores. So the big challenge is we could run those individual applications. The big challenge was, for example, can we run LIMPAC on this? And the answer is yes, but it was very difficult. And again, I will skip the details, and it turned out to be very intricate, extremely intricate exercise and research in terms of running fairly dense type of matrix code on these type of heterogeneous architectures, which actually is extensions or result on HPTC 2008, but we achieved to get about 77 teraflops using all of our infrastructures available. And this was the first time. This is the first time a GPU accelerated machine is on the top 500, and got quite a press about that. But again, this was not achieved very simplistically, but rather this was the first time, if you know how LIMPAC works, it's the first time we saw bandwidth limitations in LIMPAC, and it was quite a task. So I will not go into any of the details here. I'll leave the slides with you. But we're working on a lot in the systems area, actually, not only the applications and the portfolio of research, working all the way down from kernels, parallel algorithms, task and resource management, including dealing with heterogeneity, fault tolerance, ECC. We're starting to work with Microsoft on languages, low power, power consumption, level control. So all these things we're working on, but I'm sorry I can't go into detail. So my final 2 slides, on to next generation TSUBAME. TSUBAME will be very, very green, will be a cloudy supercomputer, whatever that means. Will be a petascale machine, running Windows HPC. So users will have a choice, and it will likely could become the first petascale Windows HPC cluster. But we've lots of problems on the way, but hopefully we can solve that. Future generations, we hope this acceleration technology will scale and bring us to the exascale era. Also, in parallel, we believe that the petascale machine can become a desktop using the same scaling technology. Now, for the big machines, they'll probably become very cloudy. That is to say that the big machines, there will be a merger of supercomputers of this scale and cloud infrastructures. On the personal level, of course, you'll have your desktop machine. So 2016 and beyond will be exascale era, and using these type of cloudy technology along with acceleration and personal petascale desktop, hopefully. And that'll be my talk. Thank you. Thank you and sorry for all the technical difficulties. Yes, sorry about that.
Where you've got ClearSpeed cards installed in the system at the moment, was that just to give the double precision floating point acceleration?
Well,
and are you planning, or would you plan to replace them with the next generation, for example, NVIDIA cards, because of their extreme price difference?
Well, so the ClearSpeed card is already in place and they're not using much power. Yeah. So it's not, and they do still offer good dense matrix performance. So they're very bandwidth limited cards. So in running stuff like FFT, pretty much hopeless. But in dense matrix, they're pretty useful. So for the lifetime of TSUBAME, which is about a year and 3 months now, 3 or 4 months now, we will probably keep them. Next generation, the double precision performance of these GPUs will propel quite considerably, we believe. So for the next generation replacement, which will happen in 2010, I see it very unlikely we'll have any clear speed in the system. But it was, but working on clear speed on some of the earlier work really taught us some lessons with respect to what acceleration is good for. And working with GPU has expanded our scope to these bandwidth applications, which CPUs are not good at. One thing I can say, that a clear difference between clear speed and GPUs. GPUs you can buy at Best Buy or whatever equivalent in your country. And so people use them, just like the previous presentation, they stick them into their little desktops and they get a lot of work done. And then when they want to scale their applications, the usual, they would like the same parallel with the traditional clusters where you have your desktop, you scale to cluster. But or then you scale to supercomputing, want the same code to scale. With existing supercomputers, because they don't have GPUs, people might do some work on GPUs they can't scale. Because so that's what we believe GPUs need to be in supercomputers, need to be in clouds and so forth.
If you do scale to very large numbers of GPUs, are you expecting in any way any reliability problems?
Yeah, that's a good question. Reliability, we're working a lot on that. And let's see. Reliability, for example, we have a software-based error correction, memory error correction, because test laws are very reliable, but they're expensive because they've been handpicked. They're like 4 times more expensive. So we took, of this cheap cluster, we took about 60 GPUs and we created our CUDA version of memtest and ran reliability tests. And we saw that on some of the cards, the bit flip errors were quite significant. Maybe like 1/4, 1/5 of the cards, we saw bit flip errors. Oh, no good. So, of course, for large scaling applications, even Teslas may not cut it because of the inherent probabilistic characteristics of these alpha rays and stuff. So we have our ongoing work doing ECC in software, or partially in software, or fully, by which we hope to reduce these type of errors. There are other reliability issues that, like we can't checkpoint GPU applications. We need to do that. We might use GPUs to help checkpoint, to compute coding. Some people have suggested that. Yeah.
Follow up on David's question. One more time. Do you anticipate this problem with bit flipping going away with time? Because at the moment people talk about GPUs and who notices if a pixel goes the wrong color when you're displaying the screen. But if they're using CUDA in order to put the physics simulations of computer games onto the cards, then people are really going to notice if your computer game keeps crashing. And so other cards are going to have
of course, vendors have talked about putting ECCs onto the cards. There are 2 problems with that. And the one problem is, of course, the cost. Full-blown ECC is expensive in terms of both money and performance. So you'll probably see in high-end, you're going to see some sacrifices in performance as well. And it's an interesting line of work to see how much minimization we can do in both ends. Using traditional style ECC might not be a good solution because of both reasons. And also, because of the commodity proliferation, you're probably going to see a lot more GPUs on people utilizing GPUs for mundane, however interesting applications. But for those, bit flip errors might be critical compared to games. So again, some form of more reliability, both in terms of hardware but also in software, that might be necessary, even low-end cards.
I'm just observing that games are their main market.
Well, yeah. Well, games, interesting story. I can't tell you about how NVIDIA tests their cards and graphics versus, games versus graphics versus real compute-bound GPUs. They're very different testing methods, but yeah, that's where the cost is, and they realize they need to solve that problem. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Oh.
Thank all of you for staying. We have a lunch and a poster session in the Innovation Center, and we'll see you out there.